Well, I've loved everyone's contribution so far. I if it's okay, I want to go ahead and jump to the statement by Russell M. Nelson and get everyone's reaction to it. Yesterday, I was surprised to see that the LDS prophet Russell M. Nelson gave a statement in response to the situation. I don't know that in the past 100, 200 years of Mormonism that the Mormon prophet felt compelled to make statements when important racial news events were occurring. So on the one hand, I thought, well, that's interesting, possibly positive. One of my believing family members reached out to me and said, "Oh, this is so amazing. The prophet made a statement. John, you need to make sure and give the prophet lots of credit for making a statement." And I thought, okay. And then I decided not to write about it and not to even really pay a lot of attention to it. I just wanted to hear what you guys thought. I wanted to hear what people of color felt. So I haven't even really thought about it or done a lot of analysis. But what I'm going to do right now is read it. And I'm going to invite you guys to pause me at any point and just say, hey, I want to say something about that. And it can be positive or negative. So this isn't just like a, tear the prophet to shreds kind of thing, even though we're all, or most of us were all post-Mormons. But have whatever reaction you have. I'm certainly not going to try and moderate or filter your reactions. So just pause me as I'm going and give your reactions. This is Russell M. Nelson, current president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. His statement June 1st, 2020, in reaction to the news of the past week or two. He writes, we join with many throughout this nation and around the world who are deeply saddened at recent evidences of racism and a blatant disregard for human life.
Okay, stop.
Okay.
It's like musical chairs. The fact that he had to add in recent evidences is trying to box this entire conversation with ignoring the history of racism in the church, ignoring the systemic racism that exists. And the fact that he adds recent is trying to say, we're not going to talk about any of that because heaven knows we don't want you thinking of looking up and seeing how racist the church was. We're just talking about what's happening right now. So I'm a little offended by that addition of recent, because you could take that out and it still flies.
Well, and talking about it, but in a disconnected way. There's no specific people mentioned. There's no specific acts mentioned.
Yeah.
It's just disconnected. It's like an empty sort of, I'm sorry if I ever did anything that may have offended anyone. I mean, it needs to be connected and specific.
You not that this is humorous, but you talk, Jason, about humor, jokes, about breaking tension, building tension. You're 100% right. I think another element, timing. So it's like timing and tension. The timing of this is like, I'm not buying it because I've seen so many corporations come out before the church even did. Mm-hmm. And I mean,
but the church owns all those corporations and sign advisors.
The church is a business. And that business decided it was in the interest of that business to speak on this matter. It's not about revelation or feeling inspired. If you were inspired, you would have spoken up, right? When Ahmaud was gunned down, chased and gunned down, you would have spoken up on that, okay?
Why is this coming out now instead of, I don't know, 2 months ago when he was addressing the entire world in a public forum?
Financial and corporate interests of this organization. I'm not buying it. Personally, I'm not speaking for the rest of you guys. I'm speaking on my own feelings. And Dr. Smith, I'm not angry, I'm passionate. But I feel as though it was in the interest of the church to speak up before they upset the populace or whatever membership of the church. But that's just my 2 cents. So I'm not buying it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that it came out after. And first of all, I'll say one thing. I'm really happy that they came out with a statement. I'm really happy that they were trying to do something. And like you said, John, I don't remember too many times they made a statement about something like this, which is current. So I'll definitely give credit there. I think as Spencer mentioned and others, they came out with it after everybody else came out with a statement. And I would love if they were on the forefront of some of this. They're not always the church that is coming out early on, whether it's with civil rights or women's rights or anything like that. Or they kind of wait to see what everybody else says, and I think they're trying to appease too many factions within the church. I don't think they need to do that if they are the church of God on the earth. They need to lead with some of these things. And they do go out and they say that they're basically saddened by everything. What I would like to see more of, and they talk about racism, I think, during in the statement. I think you'll get to this and those attitudes. What I would be happy for them to do is not just talk about those attitudes within the world generally, but within their membership, and also talk about and get to an apology, I guess, or really address what has happened over the history of the church, where the church did say something was doctrine, and the church said that this is what they believe, and they said this is what people like us really are. And some of those attitudes exist, which even today, and it permeates throughout the organization, which could lead to situations, maybe not as drastic as this, but throughout the church. And the reason I said that, and I wanted to mention this in the previous segment, was like Cecile, I remember when I was 6 years old, and I'm very embarrassed to say this, everybody, but I remember saying to my mother, I wish that I was white, right? And she said, what? Why would you say that? And as a 6-year-old, I said, well, all the white people are rich and they don't get in trouble, and the black people aren't rich and they don't seem like, and all the missionaries are white, and the people who are leaders in the church are white, and people who run the world are white. And she kind of set me straight. So I'll thank her for doing that at the age of 6. And I think I really appreciate my blackness, and not completely, not until recently, because even within the church, if you're in class with somebody who's older or even younger, and I've watched on Facebook and I heard people say this, but they believe that God cursed people to look like me. And I said, no, we've retracted that. And I said, okay, where have they officially retracted? They say that we could go to the temple and we can have the priesthood, meaning black people can go to the temple and go to the priesthood as of 1978. But even in their essay on race and the priesthood in 2013, they just said that God changed his mind. They don't say that it was a mistake. They say that men made mistakes in interpreting why God took away the right for black people to have the priesthood. So for me, from the beginning of my life through 2013, when I kind of had enough cognitive dissonance to leave, I believed that I was not quite at the same level as the white people who always had the priesthood. I was kind of down here. They always had that right because they weren't cursed like I was. And I think where I really got the cognitive dissonance was having to read the scriptures to my kids, right? Reading the Book of Mormon, where in 2nd Nephi it says that they were cursed because of their skin, so that they won't be delightful to their companions, or reading in the Pearl of Great Price where they had those curses, or reading Brigham Young saying things about the black person and their curse. So I didn't believe I was quite on the same level as a white person. And I know for a fact that white people in the church didn't. So even though they loved me, and I'll say this and you probably don't believe it, but I love my white brothers and sisters that were in the church with me. They've told me that they love me, but I don't believe that they thought I was on the same level. I don't believe that. And I refuse to read those verses to my kids. I had enough cognitive dissonance from there to actually do the research and educate myself out. But until they make some kind of statement that addresses that, and they don't need to do it right now, but they need to do it at some point. Until they do something like that and say, we made a mistake, it has to come from the top. Otherwise, people don't believe it. But I got to say, we made a mistake. That was never true. Black, white, they were always equal. God did not curse them. God does not think of you, and never has, as less than somebody else. So white brothers and sisters, you should not think that way. Until they do that, until we have a statement like that, it doesn't mean as much. And the reason is you'll always have people, like when I was in the high priest group, I've had people who felt brave enough to talk about fence sitters in heaven, black fence sitters in heaven. They still believed it. And I would say, wait a second, there was an essay. And they said, what essay? I've never heard of it. And even when they do, well, they're afraid to read the essays for one, because they feel that they'll leave the church. Maybe they will, I don't know. But they're afraid to read the essays, so they don't know. And even when they do read the essay, they would say that didn't come from the prophet. He didn't say it. And even when they do read it and they do believe it, they say, well, they just say that there was incorrect theories of men which explain why God cursed people. So there is always that belief that there's white people here, black people, or brown people down below. Until that's addressed in the same format as this, it just doesn't mean as much. As much as this means to me, it won't quite mean the same ever.
Yeah, I feel you, bro. Like, until, I mean, I just want to share with you guys, and this didn't take much effort, just a simple contrast in the approach to addressing the issue from another church. All right. Let me see if I can find this real quick. My bad. I had it up. Let's see. The killing of George, this is from the U.S. Bishop's President, Catholic Church, on the killing of George Floyd. The killing of George Floyd was senseless and brutal, a sin that cries out to heaven for justice. How is it possible that in America, a black man's life can be taken from him while calls for help are not answered? I feel like that's very pointed and direct.
What do you like about it?
Yeah.
I like that it addresses the issue head on. We're not mincing words. We're not pretending we're above the fray. They are leaning in and saying, we should understand that all the protests we're seeing in cities reflect the justified frustration and anger of millions of our brothers and sisters. I read that and I thought, wow, this is refreshing. This is cool. This is inspired. What I read from Nelson, President Nelson, my apologies, or Mr. Nelson, and I'm probably getting ahead here, felt like a corporate press release. This was not something imbued and woven together with empathy or consideration for people. I felt. That's just my opinion. I just want to address a couple of things Mark kind of touched on. The Negro in the church that is acceptable is the good Negro, the one who doesn't complain or protest or any of that stuff. And I lived this life. Like, that was me. I didn't complain. I read all sorts of crazy stuff. Can I swear on the show? I don't know. I read all sorts of crazy stuff and I thought, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to be resurrected white. Awesome. I'm going to work double hard on my mission because that's what I want. Like, that's how messed up in my head I was. And white people do not understand this. This is my existence. This was my life. I feel like I was brainwashed and a brain got put into my head that was entirely not me. I was colonized through and through, top to bottom, side to side. And after shedding that, I've realized that this was really, and Cecilia and I have talked a little bit about this, just internalized racism. I hated myself because I wasn't enough. And I couldn't ever be enough because I wasn't going to be white Jesus. Okay? Like, that is just fundamentally messed up. So I know we're talking about President Nelson's statement, but it's hard to even get past the fact that there wasn't a direct mention of this man and the struggle,
his name,
the
right?
years.
Name the guy.
His name wasn't even mentioned.
Say his name.
Ahmaud's name wasn't mentioned. Breonna's name wasn't mentioned. All these black brothers and sisters' names were not mentioned, and that is disgusting to me. It really is. I'm
breadcrumbs for everyone.
I'm going to bear my testimony that I'm so grateful I'm not a part of that anymore, and I'm free, because that is just fundamentally messed up. It's so messed up. It feels like a corporate response to a situation like Nike did and other companies. And people have been calling them out. People have been saying, hey, Nike, where's your black board members? I want to say to the LDS Church, where are your black board members? Where are your people of color at the highest levels? Where are your women that are leading, that are advocating for change? Because it's not there. Until then, it's just words. Okay. Until then, it's just words. We need action. We are watching and we are listening.
Let me jump in on this point as well, because you're talking about how pointed this is and how specific it is. A lot of us mentioned we went to BYU. So let me ask you this. Read this letter from the point of view that you turn this into English 101. And what would your teacher say? There's no point of view. You're not even specific to name the subject of what you're talking about. It's a page and a half that doesn't say anything. So that's part of the issue is we expect better.
And again, here's the difference. We join with many throughout this nation. No, I join. I take responsibility for the racist history of this church. We disavow entirely. Like, that's direct. That's actionable. Put together a plan. Say what you're going to do. Like, this is just...
You're jumping ahead now.
Sorry. Yeah, I am jumping ahead.
Let's get to the end of the letter. Yeah.
I think that was the first paragraph.
First sentence.
First stanza.
A lot to go over.
Fed up. We're fed up.
Okay. Second sentence. We abhor the reality. Should I read the whole thing? Just read it all the way through?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We abhor the reality that some would deny others respect and the most basic of freedoms because of the color of his or her skin. We are also saddened when these assaults on human dignity lead to escalating violence and unrest. The Creator of us all calls on each of us to abandon attitudes of prejudice against any group of God's children. Any of us who has prejudice towards another race needs to repent with an exclamation point. During the Savior's earthly mission, he constantly ministered to those who were excluded, marginalized, judged, overlooked, abused, and discounted. And his followers, as his followers, can we do anything less? The answer is no, exclamation point. We believe in freedom, kindness, and fairness for all of God's children, exclamation point. Let us be clear. We are brothers and sisters, each of us the child of a loving Father in heaven. His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, invites us all to come unto him, black, quote, black and white, bond and free, male and female, unquote. It behooves us, each of us, to do whatever we can in our spheres of influence to preserve the dignity and respect every son and daughter of God deserves. Any nation can only be as great as its people. That requires citizens to cultivate a moral compass that helps them distinguish between right and wrong. Illegal acts such as looting, defacing, or destroying public or private property cannot be tolerated. Never has one wrong been corrected by a second wrong. Evil has never been resolved by more evil. We need to foster our faith in the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. We need to foster a fundamental respect for the human dignity of every human soul, regardless of their color, creed, or cause. And we need to work tirelessly to build bridges of understanding rather than creating walls of segregation. I plead with us to work together for peace, for mutual respect, and for an outpouring of love for all of God's children. End of statement. Let's ask some of the women to opine, and then we'll come back to the men.
One of the things that drives me crazy about this statement is the zero acknowledgement of the history of the church. You know, that end of that first paragraph, that some would deny others respect and the most basic freedoms because of the color of his or her skin. Like, look in the mirror. You know, the history of the church it's not that far back when that was a church policy, literally. And again, they haven't ever come out with like an official explanation or apology or anything like that. And I feel like that's just completely hypocritical and unacceptable.
Yeah, and it kind of bugs me when he says the Creator of us all calls on each of us to abandon the attitudes of prejudice against any group of God's children. Why does it always have to be some outside deity? Why can't we just say, as a human being, as a person, we need to not be racist? We need to love each other, which is what they teach over and over and over. I mean, how many times have we sung the song, love one another, or taught that to our kids or taught that in a lesson? But until somebody tells us that we need to, then we don't. Like we have to wait for somebody to speak for the masses so that we can keep our herd mentality. And that bothers me. It bothers me the way they worded that. And it bothers me that it's not prevalent in any ward I've ever been in. And I lived in Utah for 7 years. I think I experienced more racism in Utah than anywhere else. And not even until after I joined the church. I mean, that's where it started for me. And I don't like this disconnection, like I said before, where it's them, there's no names. And the fact that he uses we and them, that's more divide. There's no, for some marginalized humans, like that is so disconnected and that's so dismissive of any pain that we've gone through. And not only that, but it's dismissive of the racism that's been taught in the church. There are so many people who are white who are really angry and upset and feel betrayed by the things that they were taught, because on some level they were taught to be this way. They were told that the seed of a Black person, that's like instant death, game over, you stay back. And they should be just as angry. They need a, like there should be an apology for all of us. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I will talk too much. So
No, it's good.
Well, I would say that even worse than all the horrible things we have seen on TV for these past weeks is in regards to racism, is the all the racism doctrines, teachings that have been taught in the LDS Church as God's law, His will, His doctrine, where someone just based on the color of their skin are cursed by God for sins that they committed even before they were born, and therefore they are in this life with the curse placed on them. They cannot enjoy the fullness of the blessings of the gospel due to that. And we have even the teachings that someone who would be very, very devoted to the church as a Black person would only make into the celestial kingdom as a servant to the other white gods. Okay, and so this was all taught from behind the Mormon, the tabernacle pulpit, by someone who was standing there and addressing the entire church as the only living mouthpiece for God, speaking for God in place of God. Nowadays, they are trying to disavow all of this and brush it off and walk backwards from that, saying that, Brigham Young was wrong. It was only his opinion. And there are 1,000 explanations or justifications that you can find if you are, participating in forums online and whatnot on that. And the other thing that called my attention in this is that not only President Nelson, but other members of the church that I have been speaking with in regards to racism, they love to quote 2 Nephi 26:33, that is super inclusive, which for me is just pretty much a paraphrase of Romans 10:11-13, saying that Christ invites all, doesn't matter if you are Black or white, slave or free, male or female, all are invited to come to Christ. But in that same book, people who should be reading the Book of Mormon every day, if you are in 2 Nephi 26:17, 33. If you go back to chapter 5, you find verse 22 that says, God did cause the curse to come upon them. They were white. God did cause skin of blackness to come upon them. And verse 23, and cursed shall be the seed that mixes with their seed, for they shall be cursed with the same cursing, which obviously sounds very much like the statement that Brigham Young said himself, shall I tell you what the law of God is? It sounds very, very alike. There is no way to deny that. And people will say, well, this was just his opinions, or it was not revelation. It was never canonized. Well, this is right here. It is part of the canon, guys. It is in the Book of Mormon in several places. It is in the Pearl of Great Price, Moses 7, and there you go. So it is part of the canon. And so for the president of the church to have the right to opine on that would be my perception. For him to have the right to opine on the extreme racism situation that we have happening right now in the country, and the one, in the highest position in the church as the prophet, seer, and revelator, and the president of the organization, he should be, if he wants to address that in a genuine form, then please address these deep issues in your own church first. And then you earn the right to speak about it elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And just in the sphere of influence. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just want to say, there are some very skilled writers and communicators in the church, obviously. And I used to work for the church history department. I worked for the church history museum back many years ago. Solange came to visit me after not seeing each other for several years. And she showed me some of these quotations and documents that I hadn't seen that, should make any person of color really concerned about being a member of the church. And I remember approaching, people within the organization, my bosses and some general authorities. And, they said, well, it hasn't been revealed. They just didn't have any answers. And so for this message to come out as a way to maybe, soothe the spirits or whatever it was intended to do, and to sound pretty much like a jumble of Mad Libs, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, just snippets here and there. I mean, just it's almost, and I hate to say meaningless, because someone wanted to put out a statement, but I know that there are very excellent writers. I know the process of writing 6 sentences of exhibition text, and how many eyes have to see that, and to approve those. But this, not only did it sound like Mad Libs, there is a phrase there, the brotherhood of man, okay? That's almost laughable, because it comes from a Broadway musical called How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. That's really funny if you think about it. But it just makes very little sense. It is not heartfelt. It's not personal. It doesn't mention the word killing, murder. It doesn't mention George Floyd's name at all. It doesn't talk about in real terms as human being to human beings. It's really very one, and it's very lackluster. And when I think about these, whether it's corporate statements or statements that nonprofits, museums, others are writing, and they're laying themselves bare, and they're saying, mea culpa, we have not paid this enough attention. We haven't done due diligence, and we are sorry. And this is how we're going to change. This is what we're going to do in the future. And we have enjoined, whether it's me or others, to help them. And we have, this is what we're going to be doing. That is true humility. And for a church to preach humility and to preach repentance, it struck me and pierced me deeply. And that's why I wrote that. I wrote something on the Facebook page.
Exactly. I think calling people to repentance without offering any contrition or like owning your stuff from the past, like it just screams of hypocrisy to me. And I really struggled with it. Like I've done, just as everyone's been sharing their experiences, just a little quick research, looked at a few different religious responses, and everyone's mentioned George Floyd's name. They've mentioned other instances. They've mentioned the struggle. They've mentioned the pain and suffering. The Mormon Church, for lack of a better phrase, did not give a crap about anyone in this fray. And that's why I feel like it's a corporate boilerplate type statement to say, hey, we see you, but we're not really offering anything here, you know?
Yeah, the word repentance.
So now we can stop talking about it.
Yeah, the word repentance is what really got me, because I think we can't ever beat this horse till it's dead, but the church for years and years said and did things which hurt thousands of, I mean, I can relate to it because I was a teenager, as a little kid. I did not feel like I was as valuable. And I know that there are thousands and thousands or millions of people who are white who probably didn't feel that I was as valuable as them, or how could they, right? Because they know that God valued me more. And I was willing to accept it because God himself said it. And I was willing to say, I'm not as valuable because God doesn't think I'm as valuable. Now, it might sound cute and happy and everything, but the things that we're seeing is just the tip of an iceberg. And what happens underneath those waters, it's thought processes, it's systems, it's behaviors, it's patterns, things that are built on an idea of supremacy, which is what the church has done in the past, and which the church has not yet apologized for publicly in a way that everybody in the church can agree with. Because even on Facebook, and I'm seeing people go back and forth, and so many people are still bringing up, well, God did it, so we don't really know. And people who read the church's essays, not this statement, but their essays, said, no, God didn't do it, but the essay never said that God didn't do that. So the church is perpetuating that system of belief that I'm, and brown people aren't as high as white people. I'll mention, since we're talking about quotes, I'm looking at one from Malcolm X. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, that's not progress. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress comes from healing the wounds that the blow made. And they haven't begun to pull the knife out. They won't even admit that the knife is there. So unless you admit that knife is there, you don't start the process of removing that thought process of supremacy, which is below those waters, which leads to the tip of the iceberg. It's still there. And I think they definitely need to address that in order for them to have a strong statement and a strong response to what's happening today. Again, I'm happy that they made the statement, but it's just really hard to get past that. And I can imagine how many little kids went through what I went through. I mean, that hurts me. And I think that I'll leave it at that. I'll address some more later on.
And I like that, Mark. I feel like that kind of goes back to that conversation I was saying that we need to have there. That is the only way to get past that kind of a trauma, is to have that conversation, just to really talk about it, to actually apologize for specific things. Just like the repentance process, you need to apologize for the specific things to the people that you trespassed against, right? I mean, that's how we have healthy relationships. And it's that same term that John and Julie Gottman use, a gridlocked perpetual problem. It's because everyone's uncomfortable. Nobody will talk about it. Nobody will apologize for specific things. And it creates this trauma bond. But pardon me for saying this, but the cowardice behind it won't allow for that, because it, first and foremost, in my opinion, is that it's a business, it's an organization, and they can't stir the pot. They'll lose people, and they want to have as many people contributing as possible. And there's a huge lack of vulnerability. There's a huge lack of intimacy. Not only that, but we're taught from an early age that we are the natural enemy to our creator. So the things about us, even if we weren't Black, we would still hate ourselves because we were taught to. All of my white friends, they have extremely low self-esteem. They don't feel like they have any place in the world. They don't know how to actually connect with people on a deep level. Vulnerability isn't standing up once a month reciting the same fundamental beliefs. And speaking of fundamental, I feel like in that statement, he suggests that skin color is a fundamental difference. I disagree. I don't know if I'm the only one that disagrees, but that's not a fundamental difference to me. We're humans. We have the same feelings. We have the same experiences. We act and grow because of the experiences that we've had in our lives. And especially talking to Black members of the church who are devout members, the only fundamental difference that he could be talking about is the color of our skin. But that's not a fundamental difference. You know, like I can go out in the sun all summer and I can get very, very dark, and I can stay out of the sun and I can get pretty light. It doesn't change who I am.
I agree. It's I don't know how many of you guys have been through a temple divorce and remarried, but as soon as you mentioned repentance, I thought about this whole process, because when you get temple divorced as a Latter-day Saint Mormon, you want to remarry, you have to bring to the table a full and complete confession of every sin you have committed, right? Every single thing. Like my ex-wife, she had to write a letter and say everything. And I don't mean just sexual transgression, any and everything. The church has offered no such thing when it comes to the racial injustices we have felt and suffered, and our people and people before us have felt. They've offered none of that. So I'm just going to call it out as complete and utter hypocrisy and boilerplate language to say it's time to repent. Where is your repentance? Where is your full confession? Like literally, you demand this of people, and it's completely traumatic for people who are remarrying. Like it's a traumatic retelling of everything you've done. Again, coming back to this place of perfection and this white Christ figure and trying to show, like, here's the example, the model. Where is your contrition? That is the question. When are you going to offer something to us to show us that you're serious? Because otherwise, if you're buying into this, I shouldn't judge these people, but I for me personally, I couldn't buy into it, because it's a presentation of complete and utter hypocrisy on their part.
And I love that they did the letter. There's two things that I really didn't like. One,
you were in a bishopric, you know this. This is what happens.
I know how it works. Two things that I really hated, right? So there was a repentance when they don't repent. But the thing that I didn't like, and I don't know, we might talk about this later on, but I kind of felt that over the past 8 days, the country is kind of going through this whole process. At first, there was shock and everybody was up in arms, and then everybody started getting distracted. It's like America is as a cat, and there's a laser going around, because you had this one horrific thing that's happening, and then people started to say, "But wait." Normally, you'd say, "But he was a criminal, but he looked threatening." Now they're saying, "But there are riots over here." Oh, now the riots. People were silent about the whole thing. They're thinking, "Oh, this is terrible." There was a couple of riots. They're like, "Oh, wait a second. Let's talk about those riots." I'm like, no. Why aren't you talking about what happened? "Oh, the riots are bad. Riots are bad." So they can't say Black Lives Matter.
Because they're ignoring the fire and focusing on the smoke.
They're focusing on the smoke. They're focusing on the forest behind them. They're not even looking at the fire, right? The riots. And then the disappointing thing was that the letter had to jump in and start talking about the riots. Okay, what does that have to do with what's going on? It's a distraction, which I didn't like that they included in the letter.
Mm-hmm.
Let me jump in with a couple of specific points about the letter that Mark, you just reminded me of. First of all, one of them is whenever they list a group of people, any of God's children, all the sons and daughters of God, and we have to treat them fairness, be sure that you write in parentheses, unless you're gay. Because if you read this whole letter and then remember, well, it sounds florid and beautiful. We treat everybody the same. And this same letter could have been released about the 68 Watts riots, and that still would have been under the priesthood ban, so it wouldn't have been true. So there's a bit of hypocrisy and insincerity there with all this beautiful language of this is how we treat people and we see everyone the same when we know it's not. Second thing is, to that point too about the smoke and the fire, there's a meme going around Facebook that I'm going to paraphrase, and it's in this letter where it says, we're saddened at recent evidences of racism. First of all, I love the phrase evidences of racism, like we weren't sure it was there, or acts of racism. But then we're saddened at these assaults on human dignity, and you drop to the end of the page, but destruction of property cannot be tolerated. Now flip that around. Wouldn't you expect from a Christian church leader to say, it is horrible and we're sad that property that can be replaced is being destroyed, but the murder of innocents cannot be tolerated?
Mind you, a multi-billion-dollar organization, not just a Christian church.
I'm trying not to go there. That's a whole other podcast. But even then, think about the way, the language and way this is presented. You know, it's too bad somebody got killed, but we can't have money being ruined. And that's not what we expect from our church leaders. So the next point is the last part. We need to foster faith. We need to foster respect. We need to work tirelessly. Gee, Russ, any ideas? Victoria, I think you were going to talk about this a second ago. Earlier, it behooves each of us to do whatever we can in our spheres of influence to preserve dignity and respect. I remember being taught that my bishop was not the bishop of the 400 people in my ward. He was the bishop of the 70,000 people in our ward boundaries. My stake president was not the stake president of the 4,000 people in our stake. He was stake president of the 250,000 people that live within our stake boundaries. Yes. President Nelson represents himself not as the prophet of the church, but as the prophet to the world. And he ends this by saying, we need to do better. He cites that Jesus spent his ministry caring for people, fighting against injustice. You talked to him. He got a message for us?
Yeah.
Is he quarantined? There's no sports. Like, I know he's not helping people get home runs. Like yeah, let's say something. As I think I'm a neo-fundamentalist Mormon. I don't know if that's the right phrase. I'm like, I kind of believe in the church like pre-correlation. But I respect what they used to say things. They used to speak with a finality, whether what they said was right or wrong. I respect the fact that they had statements of meaning. And this is so vanilla. This is so boilerplate. This says nothing. And in doing so, contributes to the silence of not making a choice. One of the lies of correlation is everything's binary. And he even says in here, there's right and wrong. We must distinguish between right and wrong. And Joseph Smith, Orson Pratt, Rutger Clausen, there used to be duality. There used to be complexity in the church. And they're trying to paint this as there's right and there's wrong. And it is much more complicated. There are systems of racism. There are history here. And to just say it's right or wrong is too simplistic. I expect better from LDS leaders, especially men who claim to speak with the divine power.
Something just came to mind, right, while you were talking. I think we've all agreed that letter lacks directness. It's not addressing the issue. I think if I was to guess, I'd say maybe they didn't want to offend people. Maybe they don't want to offend people who are just a little bit sensitive about being called racist or sensitive. I don't know why they're not being direct. It brought back something that I'd heard that said that the reason why blacks couldn't hold the priesthood, and I keep bringing this up, anyway, the reason why was because I didn't want to offend the members of the church who would leave or be very upset. So that's why it took so long. Maybe that's why they didn't apologize ever. And maybe that's why they didn't try to highlight it as part of the curriculum or over the pulpit or whatever reason, right? But and this is going to sound petty, but when it came to other topics, they were not afraid to offend people. They were not afraid to offend America because they said, well, it was popular to be racist and you don't want to shake the boat too much. Well, it was not popular to have multiple wives, right? And they almost fought to the death to keep that. They were not afraid to stand for that cause. I need them to not be afraid to stand up for this cause. I need to be more direct. I need to not be afraid of offending racist members or people in society. They need to be as brave as they were back then with addressing this issue.
Yeah, I can't count how many times growing up when you'd hear talks or, over like read articles or whatever about you have to stand, you have to speak your voice and tell the truth, even, if it's not popular, and, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, it matters what God thinks and all of that. And, reading this letter, it's like, well, you really think God would be satisfied with that letter going out in his name? Like, looking at everything that's going on, that he would be like, yeah, I said that, that's cool. Like, that's good enough. We don't have to, give any more on that. But it's just, I don't know. It's just the dissonance between, what is taught and what is modeled is so frustrating.
It feels like a spineless, flaccid, gelatinous response to a time of crisis in which people are hurting and suffering. Now, objective lesson here, or object lesson. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints single-handedly almost put a stop to the passing of laws that would enable gay marriage to happen in California. Single-handedly. Like, they mobilized, they did some stuff. Why can't we have the same help? Why? It's a simple question. Are we less than human? Like, what's going on here? I don't understand it. So what is the issue? I don't know. It just boggles the mind that there's this presentation, this press release. I'm just going to call it a press release. And there was no offering of support or help or acknowledgement of these human, like, literal, direct, specific acknowledgement. Again, I looked at multiple sources from other religions. There was a specificity with which they addressed the situation and acknowledgement that personally made me feel more heard than I have by this mouthpiece of God. And that is upsetting.
This is no standard of truth. You talked about sending out letters, and not offending people. The standard of truth has been erected. Mobs may combine, calumny may defame. We used to stand for something. What is this?
Well, frankly, a lot of Mormons don't believe that racism exists. They just don't believe it. And they refuse to. And I think that the church kind of wants to walk a very easy line of not coming down on the fact that not only does personal and casual racism exist, systemic racism is allowed to flourish.
Those who benefit from the system are not quick to denounce the system. And I'm going to say something somewhat controversial here, but even some of our brothers and sisters that look like me and Cecile and look like Victoria and Kimlin, they don't acknowledge this because they benefit from the system. And it's a tough thing to talk about because we all want to stand together and be together. But that's honestly been a little bit disappointing for me in seeing this, and particularly it's come from people who still affiliate with the church and seek to excuse this absence of a response. And I personally, I don't know quite how to respond to it, but I do want to call it out that we're not all on the same page. We're all hurting, but we're not all on the same page.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry too.
Cecile, then Victoria.
Okay, thank you. Back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, when I was still trying to find my eternal companion, I'd have people say, "Why are you in that church?" And of course, I would always, want to date only Mormons, and most of them didn't want to date me. They'd be friends, or else I would date gay men who would later reveal that they were gay. And at one time I even discussed marriage with someone who was gay, and he said, in the next life, I'll be straight and you'll be white. And, maybe this is what's supposed to happen. I mean, that was one of the moments that made me realize I need to leave this church immediately. But, I just think there are just so many ways in which that these philosophies and ideologies harm us, and we deserve an apology. I mean, there are people who actually ruin their lives. There are people I know who are still, single at, late 50s, 60 years old, waiting for an eternal companion because they're not supposed to date outside of the church, or, believing so deeply in these doctrines that, either go away and they're never spoken of again, and they're never disavowed. I've had grown men tell me, my mother says I shouldn't be dating a Black woman, so, we're going to end this relationship. And it all had the imprimatur, and it had the, the blessing of the doctrine of the church. And, that's just unconscionable. And so to have read that very, that very basic, letter with just absolutely no mention of any of the harms that racism as a system and a structure, not just individual acts of racial hatred and murder, and they couldn't even say murder or killing, but just all of those structural and systemic harms, not even mention that. I'm holding here a book that I have. This is one I actually donated. I left on the steps of my last chapel in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I left 6 boxes of books, of LDS-related books, including some books that probably would go for a pretty penny now, but a lot of books about race and the church. And, people still have these. These are still, never, ever disavowed. And people could quote these, like Solange was saying. And that's what I want to hear. I want to hear someone say, this was never true. I want to hear this was just, we are very sorry. Anyway, I'm sorry.
That's funny.
And Cecile, for me, the reason why we won't be able to see President Nelson standing up in a general conference and addressing the church as a whole, and making that kind of a statement where we are retracting from all of these teachings, because, as I said, they are not as what the gospel topic essays on this subject want us to make believe, that it's just theories that church leaders believed or began to spread or teach. We see that the problem is not only isolated with Brigham Young, who did make it official in 1852, but obviously it goes prior to his presidency in the person of Joseph Smith himself. He is the one who wrote, or whatever you wanted to say, got inspired, whatever, but he was the one behind the Book of Mormon and Pearl of a Great Price. So for the church to address that and have that type of public apology or public repentance, and in any way that they do this, they will have to automatically address what is written in their canonic books, and they cannot do that, otherwise we don't have a church anymore.
Again, I've tried.
Real quick, Victoria was going to speak, and then we'll have Mark talk.
Oh, I think whatever I was going to say has kind of been lost. It was specifically addressing something that Spencer said. And you know what? I can't even really remember.
Okay, we'll have Mark go, and then if you think about it, Victoria, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've literally tried to beg people to read some of these essays from the church, because partially it helps them to understand that some of these things that you used to think or you do think aren't real, right? And they won't even do it. And the ones who do, they won't believe it. And another reason why it's important to me is I remember I mentioned that it's my 20th year of marriage this year, middle of this year I'm going to be. married for 20 years, and it's an amazing thing. And my wife, she's wonderful. She's white, and being at BYU is where we met and got married. She didn't tell me this until after we were married, but apparently while she was dating me, a whole bunch of people, friends, family, they gave her these statements, whether it was from Brigham Young or many prophets after him, prophets who were apostles, people who were alive. In writing, they gave her letters and statements, explained to her what a mistake she'd been making to marry me. Talked about the kids, obviously, the seed of the mixed couple will be cursed and all that. Those are statements from modern day prophets that she had been given, and they were pretty scary. They told her that she would be passed over for callings at church, and she had a much bigger, tougher decision to make than I knew about. So I'm so happy that she loved me enough to ignore all of those different statements and still choose to marry me. But she had a pretty steep hill to climb. Now, I keep bringing this up because a whole bunch of the church still believes that. People who are savvy enough to comment on Facebook, some of them don't believe it. Maybe they just don't feel it's true. Maybe some of them are brave enough to read the essay and believe it, but it's never been really said in general conference over the pulpit or in a letter like this that was a mistake and it's not true. They said, oh, we don't know the reasons why, but this is what God did. They don't say it. They need to say it. I don't know why they won't say it.
I feel like that goes back to that lack of transparency, the lack of vulnerability, the lack of intimacy. It's frowned upon, and they won't say it. And I shared some of the things that my family members said to me before I got married. We're so excited, and we got engaged, and we were sat down and told the same things. I was asked, well, what are you doing? He's not going to ever be called to be a bishop, and that's what he's always wanted. How could you do this to him? And he's saying this right in front of me. We're both sitting there, and he's saying, you're forfeiting all of these callings by marrying a Black girl. And where are your kids going to fit in? They're going to be too white to be Black and too Black to be white. You guys are really good individually, but as a couple, no one will respect you. You won't fit into this community. And it's kind of broken my heart. We've been married for 18 years now. But unfortunately, quite a few of the things that he said have actually turned out to be true. And so I was so hurt and I was so frustrated. But then I think about it, and my kids have been left out because, I've got 2 brown kids with brown hair and 2 white kids with blue eyes and blonde hair. And they're just not quite sure where my kids fit in. But if they stop that ridiculous notion that your skin color stigmatizes you, then they would get to know my kids and they would understand that they're amazing people, But I was told the same things. Everyone, like, what are you doing? I wasn't told that. I was listening to that in front of my future husband. Like, what are you doing? You're ruining his life. You're ruining our lives.
I mean, I can't believe that you went through that because fortunately I didn't. Fortunately, they just told my wife. It didn't happen to come back to me until afterwards. But you were really brave going through that and experiencing that and still moving forward. And I think I have to give credit to many people within the church who still express love to me and people of color. It's almost like they want to try extra hard in many cases to show that they're good guys and show that they do love us. But I just still think that underneath all of that is this unspoken, unsaid, well, sometimes unspoken or unsaid belief or feeling that is going to continue to fester, and it will never change. I don't think anything will happen for it to change until you have some kind of letter or statement signed or said by the people at the top.
Let me go ahead and ask you guys to each kind of come up with a closing statement. So each of you kind of think about some final things that you want to share, either things you haven't shared before, or just kind of to summarize. We're we're coming up on about 2.5 hours, and I want to make sure we keep it at a length where people don't get turned off and kind of tune out. So it's been so wonderful, so many insightful comments, so much wisdom here, so much power. I am just floored and honored that I could just be a part of just observing this dialogue. So I want to thank you all for that. And so now what we'll do is we'll give each of you a final say, hoping that we'll also bring you all back at other points for other types of topics too, not just this. So let's go ahead and start with Jason. Jason, do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, two things. To the comment earlier that, people individually don't see themselves as racist, but the system is. I kind of have that feeling about the church, and that people need to be sure and be careful that they don't try to excuse it and say the church isn't racist because I know people in the church who aren't, or I'm not racist. We're not saying all members are racist. Some of the most beautiful, wonderful, loving, incredible, Christ-like, gorgeous people in the world that made me the good person I am are members of the church. I'm proud to be an American. America's racist. The church has a racist past, a racist history, perpetuate a racist system. And a thought I just had a moment ago to finish up about the letter, I would be interested in comparing the language that Russell Nelson used in making this turn to make sure we don't say LDS anymore because LDS is wrong, and to see how strongly he spoke about that subject and compare it with what he said about race and equality. And I'm pretty sure he spoke more stringently and stronger about the first one. That's what they're busy doing, is making sure that nobody says LDS.
It was interesting you said that, because I saw something floating around social media, someone saying, being called Mormon now is equivalent to being called the N-word. And I was just like, what are you talking about? Like, what? Anyhow, I'll have to find the reference and send that to you, John. But yeah, it was a wild time.
Well, we get called both, so what does that mean about us?
Yeah.
True. Good point.
Solange, do you want to go next?
Yes. Well, I would say that I thank you, John, for inviting me to be part of this panel today. And well, looking at all of the things that are taking place in and outside of the church, and as a biblical Christian, I think I'm the only one in the panel that professes belief in Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. I see all of this, and for me, it is impossible to look at all of this situation without thinking about the priceless value that the human life has, because we are all image bearers of God, and we have been created in His image. And so all of us are the same. All of us are equally valuable. And I will just say that Jesus Christ came to die and pay for the sins of all of us. And he says that all who believe him, he has given equally the right to become children of God. And so any differences based on anything like racism has no place in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and no place in the Bible either.
Thanks, Solange. Victoria.
There we go.
Closing, just a closing, any closing statements you want to make?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm really grateful to be sitting here at this panel. This is really neat. It's really awesome to talk to people who have some of the same issues and the same experiences as I've had. I've never, ever been able to talk to this about anyone other than my two brothers, and who left the church before I did. And even though I've been married for 18 years, we still can't talk about this. It's too awkward for my husband. We don't talk about it at all. So this is really, really neat. So thank you so much. As far as, that letter goes, I feel like it's empty, but, and I'm in no way bashing Nelson or the church. I am with Mark when I say that I love all of the members who I've connected with, and I've genuinely felt their love for me. I'm not saying that these are inherently bad people or anything like that. But I do think that in an organization where they're constantly teaching that we need to love each other, I firmly believe that you cannot love anyone without intimacy and vulnerability. You can't genuinely love someone without listening to them and without allowing them to share their story, even if it's something that is abrasive to us. I think that there needs to be some kind of an address to, all of the followers about listening to this need that we have to be heard and the racism to be addressed and acknowledged and admitted to. And a lot of the things that Nelson was saying were things of the past, of past racism. It's just as strong now. And, and it's being videotaped. It's out there. We have access to the internet now. We know what is happening in people's lives. And so they can't really hide behind that anymore. I know there was a statement that was put out saying to stay away from media, right? Don't go looking for things. Don't read anything unless it was put out by the church. Basically, keep your head in the sand and don't listen to truth. Don't listen to experiences. But I think that now more than ever, we need to just listen to each other, because if we don't, it's never going to change. We need to have that uncomfortable conversation. We need to have that awkward apology, and it may not change all of the beliefs. It definitely, just that in itself wouldn't bring me back, because it just runs too deep for me. I've studied too much. But I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of hearts that can be healed, and that there's a lot of suffering that can be stopped if there's at least just a specific acknowledgement of the pain that's been caused by the teachings of that organization.
Thank you, Victoria. Mark.
Yeah, sometimes, one thing that I didn't mention, I always felt like I was the ultimate minority. I think what Victoria said triggered that, right? I was in Jamaica, a Black Mormon in Jamaica, which unheard of. And moving to America, where the Black Jamaican Mormon who was Republican, but now I'm independent, and let me see, now ex-Mormon. So there's just not too many people in the entire universe within that category. So thank you, Victoria, for helping to think about that. There's just not many people we can go to talk about and share it with. So whereas everybody else in the world can say, hey, this is our community, this is what's happening. How many people were Black, raised Mormon, maybe lived in the Western United States, now probably ex-Mormon? Just not that many people out there. And humans need to share their pain, they need to share their happiness, they need to share their sorrow. And in this time of great pain, it's really hard for us to share. So if you do hear us, if you're a white Mormon, white ex-Mormon, or anybody else, and you hear us sharing or talking, that's just us processing and being human. Don't think that we're we hate you, don't think that we're ungrateful, don't think anything. We just can't really share with too many people out there. So definitely I appreciate you mentioning that, Victoria. The letter, again, I might be different from the group, but I was happy that they did it. I don't think that, I didn't really have high expectations, but they did it. It was pretty brave of him to fire up the PR department to write the letter. It's something. It's not the letter that we wanted, but it's the letter we have. I think it's okay. So thank you to the Mormon Church for doing it. It would mean a lot more to me as a former Mormon, and I can guarantee you, they won't say it, but I'm pretty sure that many Black members of the church would want something more. And we talked about it at length, about actually repenting of what they've done in the past and said in the past. And even though it's just words to some people, it has real meaning. I hope I communicate to that, but it really, what they have said in the past really has impacted or impacts the lives of children and people within the church who are my color. Talking about America, I'm sure just like many of us here, I've been walking on the streets in front of my nice neighborhood and have a guy in a pickup truck drive down the street and yell the N-word at me. Or I could see people saying, well, it's just our culture. So here we have a Confederate flag up here and a bumper sticker or something. To me, I don't know if that means that they have the capacity to kill me when nobody's around, but that's part of America. I had a cap that I had a picture, it had an American flag on it, and it had the Jamaican colors. Somebody from, a friend from Jamaica who lives in Canada now said, hey, why are you wearing that racist flag? And I thought, what? Did I mess up the flag? No, they're referring to the American flag. So outside of America, it sounds like the perception is that that flag represents racism. And I thought about the response. I was doing yard work, came back and I typed up a reply. I said, well, this is before this whole situation, the Floyd situation. And I said, I guess the flag could be racist. If you're a racist and you want a symbol to stand behind, you use that flag as a racist symbol. But I don't want to, as an American, cede any ground to those people. I want that flag to represent the people who are not racist. In fact, the people who fight for my rights, and they have fought for my rights over the past couple hundred years. I want that flag to represent those people. So until those people who have been quiet or in the middle stand up and say, this is my symbol, and this is what I'm doing, what I'm saying, to fight for the rights of all those who have been disadvantaged, people, racists, will continue to take that flag on. And I've had lots of people call me, sit me down, ask me, hey, what can I do? What can I do? And whether you're a soccer mom or somebody in a position of power, I think bravest thing that you can do is let people know where you stand, because I know it's kind of not popular to even say certain things. They don't want to be a rebel rouser. But if you are brave enough to put on your Facebook a statement of support and even say that my life matters, it's not a bad word. Come on, guys, just say that my life matters. You become somebody that I can look over and say, oh, that person supports me. Maybe I was afraid to lean on someone, but I can see where you stand. Tell me that you support me. And other people who say, well, hey, that soccer mom over there is okay with saying something. Maybe I can do it too. Let that fire start to spread. Take back the symbols that you think mean something and make it actually mean something. Then the last thing, please, 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 and I stole this from Facebook, but it means a lot, right? Make sure that you're raising kids who won't kill my kids. And the reason I say that is you don't even know what your kids are picking up on, but I've had my sons, when they were in elementary school, maybe 5 years ago, 4 years ago, during a political campaign, start using N-word derogatorily. And I'm thinking, where the heck will they learn that? They learn it from what their parents say at home. So maybe you think you're just keeping things in, but if you're saying things that your kids are picking up on, make sure you're not teaching them things that will let them eventually kill my kids in the years to come. So again, final words. Hey, thank you to everybody who was here. It's been a pleasure to be in the company of such smart and articulate people in my very, very, very small community. Hopefully we're saying things that help others as well.
Thanks, Mark. Kimmy Lynn, did I get you in? Are you next? Okay, yeah. The images jumbled around and I've lost track. Forgive me.
Yeah, so I guess one thing, kind of piggybacking off of what Mark just was talking about with your children, race wasn't a topic in my home growing up, and everything I learned about race I had to learn on my own, because my parents were like, oh, race doesn't matter, everyone's the same, even though that was completely opposite from what I experienced in the outside world. All the comments and stares and that kind of thing, And so I came to realize that I couldn't talk about race with my parents because it made them uncomfortable. But as the years have gone by, I've been able to understand that people are uncomfortable because of themselves. And that's not my problem. Like, I can only speak about what I need to say. I can only say what is important to me to say. And if other people are made uncomfortable by that, that is something that they need to deal with, they need to face on their own. And that the younger you talk to children about these things, the less uncomfortable they'll be about it in the wider world, and the more they'll be able to have these important conversations with those around them. And that's how change happens. And so important to me for parents to speak about tough topics with their kids and help them understand that there are bigger things going on in the world that may not affect you directly, but affect others. And by affecting others, it does affect you, because we're all connected. We're all, brothers and sisters. And I think another thing, just to finish off, is that importance of validating other people's experiences. I've realized that that's one of the most important things for me when it comes to discussing these things with other people, is that if they validate where I'm coming from, and if I validate where they're coming from, then it's so much easier to have like a meaningful, civilized conversation. You have to be aware that everyone is coming from a different place, and that if you don't understand where they're coming from, you have to listen, and you have to try to understand where they're coming from, because you can't just assume that you know everything that they're dealing with, because you don't, and they don't know everything that you're dealing with. So it's a give and take, but just the importance of validating others' experiences is something very important to me as well.
Beautiful. Thanks, Kimmy Lynn. Spencer.
Sorry. Yeah, it's I appreciate the opportunity to be like Mark said, just among so many, I think, experienced, brilliant, smart, inspiring people. I think you alluded to this in the beginning, John. There are a lot of stories here, and I hope you're able to bring people like Kimlin and Victoria. I'd love to hear their stories and experiences, Solange as well, and hopefully you have the opportunity to do that. It's just been a heavy time. I like to think of myself as not a tourist, but an immigrant to the struggle. Like this has been something that's come to my attention, and something I've had to just learn to be a part of and support. and not criticize and just listen, right? And it's been eye-opening to just see all these injustices perpetuated out in the open, but also it's been eye-opening and frankly, if this is any sort of testimony, reaffirming about and reassuring about my decision to part ways with the Mormon Church, because Mr. Nelson's statement didn't offer me any sense of contrition or being Christ-like in the sense that, hey, I'm going to own my stuff here and call out oppression. Christ as a figure, as far as we understand, was a rebel. And this feels just so boilerplate and spineless and not courageous at all. And it's frankly depressing to me as someone who doesn't necessarily associate with the Mormon Church in terms of affiliation or membership, but I feel for my brothers and sisters, and I don't just mean people that look like me, like everyone. We deserve better. We deserve an acknowledgement by name of these people who have been dealt injustices. And that's frankly for me what's been just so upsetting rather, that they're, maybe this is controversial, but I've been thinking through this whole process that maybe if we were property too again, y'all would care. Maybe, just maybe you'd listen a little bit more. Oh, our property, they're crying out for help. Like, it's uncomfortable to hear, and it should be uncomfortable, because if it's not uncomfortable, nothing will come of it. It's hyperbole, yes, right? It's an extreme example, but historically speaking, when we were property, there was more care and concern than there has been now. And that's, for me, what's upsetting. And, being a father, like I said, and just realizing this could be me, that I've been, I've been comfortable, like Dr. Smith said, in my middle classness, in my recognition that I've had opportunities and things afforded to me. And I've unfortunately drowned out the cries and voices of my own brothers and sisters, but no more. I've gotten questions from a lot of white friends, I will say, what can we do? I posted a few videos about my own experience, and I've gotten these questions, and I didn't quite have a good answer until today, where I saw a friend of mine who is white write to their representative, and I thought, okay, I've never done this. Maybe I should do this. And I did it, and it felt so empowering. If you want to do something, here's the message. Turn your privilege to power. That's what I'm asking for. Turn that privilege that you have to power. If I go alone and speak to my representative, the odds are I will be ignored. But if we all go together and say this is a problem, we demand police reform, we demand to be heard. And this goes for the institutions of government, but also our religious representatives. We demand change. This is unacceptable. Let's go. That's what I want personally. I want to feel like I'm in this fight with you. And we are watching. We see you. Like, time's up. Speak up. That's the other thing that's stuck in my mind. Time's up. Speak up. I'm not okay with this personally. John and all of you whom I consider to be family and friends now, I had a conversation with my children that I never thought I'd have to have. My boys are 9. Sorry, it's even hard to talk about. My boys are 9 and 7. And I said to my 9-year-old, I said, I am sorry. I'm sorry. I thought that we were past this. I'm sorry, and I need to let you know what happened. And I had to tell him that there are people out there that hate him because of how he looks. My kids are different. They're mixed. So one has my hair, one doesn't. And that's besides the point, because, and even speaking with my other sister, just about this concept that it doesn't matter if you're mixed, people will see you as Black. They will see you as these things. And that is our burden to bear. I had to tell my 9-year-old, 9 years old, this is his burden to bear. That when we get pulled over, we sit, palms up, hands out. I actually had this experience with a cop in Utah. I got pulled over. Hands up, palms out, license between my thumb and my palm. He says to me, you don't have to do that. And I just shake my head. I can't even bring myself to speak because of the terror that I feel. And people don't understand that. And I'm just saying, hear us, listen to our stories, walk with us in lockstep. Enough is enough. It's not enough to just say, I'm not racist. I'm not this, I'm not that. That's not enough anymore. Okay? We're human. I just want to, this is going to sound weird. I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be observed. I just want to be a part of all of it. And enough of it. Like, enough. I hope to God, the universe, whatever's responsible for all this, the simulation, that this all has a purpose, that we can just move beyond this pain right now. We are hurting, and we just want to be heard. In the name of the universe, amen.
Thank you, Spencer. Cecile.
Yeah, so, wow. I'm just so grateful that we had this platform today. Thank you so much for allowing us to speak, to tell our stories, and to share our pain, to speak our hopes. It really is meaningful. And it was just wonderful to have two of my brothers here tonight. I love you, and thank you so much. Spencer spoke about the fact that, if we were machines, we'd be loved more. And that's really coincidental. This week I wrote a poem called Back When We Were Dishwashers, and I published it on my blog, because it's true. We were stolen from the African continent as heavy machinery to do labor. We were looted from Africa. We were looted. And there are people who would rather see us, if they see us at all, as things to be used rather than as people. And I spoke earlier about people asking me, well, why would you stay in that church that, treats you like that, or has those principles or doctrines or dogmas that, that dehumanize you? And, I've thought about all kinds of systems of oppression. And I think about people who are in the LGBTQ plus community. And even at BYU, I thought of myself as a feminist. I drew for the Student Review back when it was, back when it was subversive. But all of these systems of oppression, and people say, why do you stay? I have to look at them and say, why do you stay? You might not be like me, but if you're not with me, I don't know if you're for me or not. A few years ago, I went to dinner at the home of a friend here in Pittsburgh. And my husband and I were invited to have dinner with her husband. And after the meal and a really relaxing time, we were leaving her house, and she was laughing. She said, you know what? We have some KKK members on our street. And she left. And, as you can imagine, she's no longer my friend. I don't know if I can trust people. And I don't know if I can trust being safe if people don't speak out. Silence is violence. And so that's why that message hit me so hard when I read it. And I thought, wow, of all I've given to the church, I was a member for more than 30 years. I have been reading from the time I was 3 years old, and I devoured church books, manuals, everything I could get my hands on. I wanted to know doctrine. When I was a child, I gave everything I could to the church. I should tell you too, there was a point in my life I went to the temple several times a day. I was the most devout person most people knew. I mean, it was weekly on a normal schedule, but there was one point when I was just aching for answers. And, of all the tithing, of all the hours, of everything that I could give, if people don't stand with you, and if no action is taken, I don't know. As wonderful as some Mormons are, and some members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and as much as the church has given me, I'm grateful for some of the experiences, but I just cannot trust that in the end, they will not be against me. So I just want to say, stand up, speak up, do something, because it could be a matter of life or death.
So beautiful. Thank you, Cecile. Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Solange. Thank you, Kimmy Lynn. Thank you, Victoria, Jason, Mark, and Darren that had to leave us. What a powerful and meaningful and sacred 3 hours we've spent together. I hope to meet you all in person if I haven't yet, and I hope to bring you back on Mormon Stories for your stories or for other topics. So thank you. It's been a wonderful time. I hope, listeners, you've enjoyed this as much as I have. I have to say these names before we end. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and the hundreds and thousands and millions of others who have experienced systematic racism throughout our history. Wish we could say all their names. I want to say Black Lives Matter. I want to say those words. I want to say I'm sorry for participating in the system and for not even understanding it. When I was at BYU in an American Heritage class back in '87, I had a professor play some rap music and talk about how the anger there just and the violence that was portrayed there just wasn't a good representation of how we should speak and act in the public square. And that was 30 years ago. And I was just reflecting today. I pulled up Spotify and I pulled up a Black Lives Matter playlist, and I was listening to the music. And as some of those rap songs came on, I thought for 30, 40 years in the history of rap, I've always thought about rap music as being too angry. And then I just thought, back in the 80s, they were singing about cops killing people. This has been going on for decades. And there's a real reason for this anger. And this is not new. We just have cameras. And I just felt, intellectually, I knew that this has been going on, but emotionally, I just didn't understand. And I'm so sorry for not understanding for so long and not doing what I needed to do. So I will try to do better. And thanks. It's not your jobs to teach us, but thank you for being willing to share, and for teaching us anyway. So
I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot, John. Real talk, there in certain circles, you kind of have had a reputation for being a little bit tone deaf. So I will say, for me right now, this moment is good. And I think you're being exemplary and just saying, hey, I may not have listened, I may not have seen. Tell me what to do. Or just like I think this is great. I love this. I'm impressed by your willingness to just be open and listen and giving us this chance to share our stories and experiences. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks again for the trust and for everything you guys have shared. So you guys take care, hang in there, and stay as safe as you can. And let's all do our part, listeners and everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks
John.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys have a great evening. Take care.
Bye.
Can't wait to meet you guys all in person.
Likewise.
Thanks, everybody.
Good evening. Bye-bye.